Okay, so good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share my research through this platform. So the research I'm going to, my topic, is right tree, right place for optimum urban heat mitigation. So this research is like an interface between urban planning, urban climate science, and landscape architecture, that kind of interdisciplinary work. So recently I joined UCD Geography after 3 years of postdoctoral fellowship at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So this research is one of the major projects I conducted while on that postdoc fellowship. So the reason I say that is most of my work will be kind of case studies, and so it's more tailored towards the Hong Kong high density environment. So just to start, we all know that population is rising, and in fact, our cities are becoming denser. So, for example, Bangladesh has about 1,000 persons per square kilometer, and in Monaco is up to 25,000, and Hong Kong over 6,000. Dublin City is around 4,300 persons per square kilometer, and if this rate actually continues, we realize that according to the United Nations, over 70% of the world population will be living in urban areas. Now, what does this translate to in terms of the environmental challenges? So one of the core environmental challenges that urbanization brings to us is the concept of urban heat island. So basically that's where you have higher temperature in the urban environment relative to the suburban and rural area. Probably you have seen this image of different versions of it. So in urban areas, there is heat storage because of building materials that we use, because of concrete, and there's energy retention within the urban environment. And because there are limited vegetation, which could have brought in transpiration and release of latent heat and all of that, the urban environment is always about 3 to 10 degrees hotter than the suburban rural areas. So it's actually a problem because this means that we have to use more energy in cooling our buildings. In fact, there is heat-related mortality in Europe. For example, in 2015, about 15,000 people died because of urban heat, and also heat wave as well. So in fact, aggravating the issue is the climate change and global warming. So when in conditions where you have high temperatures in the urban environment, and there's also a regional impact of heat wave, regional influence of heat waves, you're definitely going to have a aggravated level of human mortality. So my research is more of trying to mitigate this heat. So there are a lot of strategies we can use to mitigate urban heat. So this is one called from the UCMAP project in Hong Kong, where 4 strategies were proposed. One is if we can modify the building materials and building and construction material. So that is modifying the albedo of these materials. We can actually reduce urban heat, and also implementation of vegetation. Okay, so and also shading by either artificial method or using the buildings as well to create shade within the urban environment. And also we have to increase ventilation in the city. I guess urban heat is not much of a problem in this climate, but it's a major one in the subtropical and tropical climates like Hong Kong. Now, the point about time scale comes about many at times cities tend to implement some of these strategies, but because of the scale is sometimes very limited or not as much as one would imagine. The impact then becomes very small. So the higher the scale of implementation of these strategies, the greater the scale of the effect. So for my talk, it's it's going to be more of the ecosystem services of urban vegetation. So like we all know that trees are highly, they provide certain ecosystem services, from air quality improvement to thermal comfort improvement to stormwater reduction and all of that. Now, the point is sometimes we plant trees, but they are not based on needs. Okay, so many times if trees are planted, they only serve a purpose. They are not serving any purpose. They're just planting trees basically because we wanted to plant trees. And in fact, depending on the tree species we choose, certain trees may actually be detrimental to the environment as well. So currently, research is now moving past the point of generalizing trees to having some species-specific analysis. So in that a tree is able to mitigate urban climate, for example, does not necessarily mean it will be good for air quality. So sometimes some trees are VOCs emitters, and if such trees are in the urban environment, they could be detrimental to human health. So it then boils down to the fact that there should be species-specific analysis of trees before we can, and it has to be need-based as well, before we can be able to make selection of trees to be planted in the urban environment. Okay, just a brief overview of what Hong Kong looks like. So Hong Kong and why it is, this study is also quite important. Now, Hong Kong is high density environment. So an average building in Hong Kong is about 60 meters. So while I was living in Hong Kong, I lived on the 8th floor, and that is actually regarded as a low density environment. So you can have buildings up to 100 plus meters, 200 meters. And another important point is that out of the land space of the city, only 22% is buildable. So which means that they had to go, vertical to accommodate over 7 million population. So even though 40% of the land area is green nature reserve, just 20% of the buildable land area is actually green. So this means that just an average person can have just 2 meters square green space. So compare that to what you have in Dublin, for example, it's about 45 meters square per capita. In Tokyo, it's about 7 meters square, and in the neighboring Singapore, it's about 10 meters square. So this tells lead us to one point that there is insufficient of greenery in Hong Kong. Now, to address this problem, the government set up certain guidelines dating back to over 10 years ago, 2010. So they developed what they call the Green Master Plan, where they into parcels and then develop a master plan that identifies potential location for tree planting. And also through the Hong Kong planning department, they set up what is called the planning standard guidelines, which has a portion, a chapter for greening. So this greening strategy actually enforces public and private land developers to have 20 to 30% greenery in their site, on their site. And also at district level, the greenery percentage that was recommended has to be up to 20 to 30% as well. So for example, if you look at this is Tsim Sha Tsui area of Hong Kong, you can see the areas marked in green are the potential green corridor, they call it, where trees has to be planted in a bit to increase or to increase the greenery coverage ratio of the city. Now, although some of these projects were very, very successful, actually the greenery coverage ratio in the city actually increased, but many of those trees were wrongly placed within the city rather. So this is because there was no standard as to what kind of species you can choose to plant in a particular location. So the government then had to launch this project called the Right Tree, Right Place project, where you have to answer question of why do you want to plant the tree? So you have to answer the question of function. What is the purpose of the tree planting? Is it to mitigate heat? It is to cool? Of course, in this kind of environment, urban cooling is the priority. So so you have to answer the question of why would you want to plant the trees, and how would you like to maintain the trees, and to determine what kind of species you're going to shop or you're going to select. Okay, and actually now you have to go through qualified horticulturist or landscape contractor, which will be able to help to select the kind of trees. But before this project was launched, some of the greenery works that were completed in terms of urban heat mitigation, we can see that some of them actually failed in their purpose. For example, if you look at some of these trees, the ones crossed are not efficient in terms of urban climate mitigation. So in an open urban environment like this, you expect a well-shaded trees. So these pictures were taken after years of completion of the project. So it's not a question of if the trees were matured enough or not. So the kind of species selected were actually wrong and could not serve the purpose they were selected, they were planted for. Now, so this gave back to my project, in which I tried to understand the interaction between urban morphology and cooling potential of trees. So in urban areas, there are two shading mechanisms. So one, especially in high density cities like Hong Kong, you have the buildings itself, and also you have the trees. So to characterize the urban morphology, we always use the sky view factor. So sky view factor is the amount of visible sky in an hemispheric view. So if you look up in 360 degrees, how much of the sky can you be able to see? Now, if you have very low buildings around, like we have mostly in Highland, about more than 50% of the sky will be visible. As a matter of fact, it could be up to 70, 80% in some areas in Highland. But if you look at this kind of structure, for example, only 20%, 0.2% of the sky is actually visible. So with this kind of concept, we know that this area we have to give it high priority. Areas that have high sky visibility have to be given high priority in terms of tree planting, while in areas with low sky visibility, the tree planting priority is actually low. Okay, so this is one of the lessons we learned from the preliminary study that we conducted. Then another point is that depending on where you now place the tree, so if we compare placing tree in both in this canyons, for example, this urban canyon, and I conducted an experiment, okay, a numerical experiment to test 8 common tree species for amenity planting in Hong Kong. So, and I placed each of these trees in each of these canyon. I extracted this data just to explain this concept, and you find out that, for example, this particular tree, if you place it in, excuse me, so if you place the tree in 0.2 in high density environment and in low density and in medium density, the difference is not that much, of course. But if you consider this dense foliage tree, for example, and if you place it in high density environment compared to when you place it in low density, you see the difference is quite large in terms of thermal comfort improvement. Now, what does this mean is that trees in high density environment, they are conflicting, or there are two competing shading mechanisms, the building and also the tree. So in high density environment, the tree shading, the building shading capacity actually outweighs that of the tree. Okay, so this is another lesson that we learned, that trees cooling potential is dependent on the species and also the urban location. So you can see variability among the tree species that were selected for this test, and also the difference in terms of their location in the urban environment. Now, so this led us to the development of the right tree, right place approach for urban heat mitigation. So it's a generic approach. We discussed that of the Hong Kong case study here. So the step one is to select the urban infrastructure, and here we are considering the urban geometry and an urban tree. So these are the two that we want to couple together. So we selected 10 different urban densities, so based on their sky view factor. Okay, so based on the amount of sky that is visible. So we selected 10 along this curve, and also we develop a generic tree classification scheme. So based on the physical parameter of tree, so it is on the assumption that tree species are actually different based on their form. Actually, there are some trees that have the same form, but they are different species. So we group those together. Later on, we are going to see that. So, but the point is, trees actually differ in terms of their physical characteristics, so, or their morphological characteristics. Now, we then have to subclass each of these 4 parameters of tree into subclasses. So with that, if we do the permutation and combination, we're able to derive 54 forms of trees. And we couple that with 10 sky view factor. And then we had 540 scenarios. I then had to do the simulation in what we call the heavy met model. This model helps us to study the surface, plants, and building interaction in terms of urban climate. And I was able to derive what we call the PET. So PET is like the objective, the objective thermal comfort index. So for example, we are outside, we can, depending on the value, we can know the amount of, your level of thermal comfort in the urban environment. So based on the difference between when you have tree and when you don't have tree, normalized by when it is in the reference environment, we can be able to determine the heat reduction potential of each tree. So this chart here shows the density. So the lower the number, the denser the urban environment. And these are the 54 tree forms. And so what is important here is the variation of the heat reduction potential of each of these trees. So after we derive this, we then had to do the cluster analysis in trying to group each of the tree species into different clusters, so that landscape architects, for example, can have a bulk of a group of trees to choose from when he or she decided to plant tree in any of this urban density. So again, it is clear that for this tree form, for example, you see the variable heat reduction potential along the urban density axis. So having derived that, we then have to, so that was like parametric study, but now we have to test in a real urban environment. So we selected a particular location in Hong Kong where the sky view factor is actually variable. So in this environment, this is the building footprint. And with the building footprint, we can derive the sky view factor map. So the red color shows the sky is highly open, and the blue means there is low visibility of sky in the low area. So the whole concept of this right tree, right place is that with this sky view factor map, we can be able to detect the trees, we can be able to develop tree species selection map. Okay, so then we test based on 4 scenarios. So one is when there is no tree. 2 is when there is uninformed selection. So people just randomly select sparse foliage tree species and then plant it in the environment. And when there is uninformed selection of dense foliage density. So this is supposed to be the best case scenario. And we compare those with when we use our right tree, right place approach. Now this is what we have. So we then simulated again, and then we were able to derive the PET plot. So PET again is the objective thermal comfort index. Now higher values means there is high heat stress. So and lower value means there is extreme cold stress. So in Hong Kong, most of the time you are in the slight warm to very hot zone. So even when you have trees, it is still about slightly warm. So this is the distribution of the PET when you have no tree, when you have the sparse foliage trees and the dense, and then when we use our approach. So what does this translate to? It means that with no tree, you are having about 17% of slightly warm. This is the best case scenario. And you can see the slightly warm zone, the percentage area of the area coverage of slightly warm actually is almost doubled, even with the best case scenario, which is the dense foliage trees. So which shows that our approach is actually more efficient than even what's supposed to be the best case scenario. And another advantage of this approach is that it helps to have this diversity of trees in the environment. So this is my last slide. I just want to show this. So we started with this generic trees classification, but so we have to go from tree form now. So tree form, which is more parametric or idealistic, to having concrete or realistic tree species. So we then had to conduct a tree survey in a selected neighborhood. So this is one of the densest neighborhood in Hong Kong. And we have to go on tree survey, try to measure the physical parameters or the morphological characteristics of each tree. So this is the map that you have here. So eventually we're able to archive over 2,000 trees within the urban, urban landscape. So each of these trees were then grouped based on the tree form that we have developed. So, and what we have here is that we have over 109 tree species. So for each of these 109 tree species, they actually fall within one of the tree forms. So for example, if in an area, based on our framework, the software tells you to select a kind of tree form. So you can actually go into this database and then know which tree species correspond to this tree form in based on our pilot survey. So this talk has been, I mean, this research has been recently published in the Science of the Total Environment. And so if you are interested to know more, you can actually find this paper online. And I would like to thank you for the opportunity to share my work, and I welcome questions and comments.